Now that's what I call an entrance. Hiya, Bill, my hero. Glad to see you.
You're my hero,
Son of a gun.
Stanley.
But nobody told me not to dress.
Well, I'll undress if
You're beautiful.
Stan, it's so good to see you.
Good to be here.
We worked together on Tech War. You won't remember this, but you sent me a Christmas thing, a postcard, and you had drawn it, and it's a favorite. I've got it framed, and it's on my wall.
Really? Why don't you try selling it? It's got to be worth $1 or $2 by now.
Hey, if I sign it, it'll be worth $3. So, it's a pleasure to see you for a number of reasons. All of us in America and Canada read comic books, and it became part of our culture and part of the way we imagine stories. So when we got to books and Gothic novels, and comic books were a huge influence on the way we thought. And I think that's a major factor in horror films today. But go back to a story. Take the Spider-Man. How does the Spider-Man come about? Where does Spider-Man start?
Well, I've mentioned many times before, I have told this story so often that for all I know, it might even be true. But it is really, see, when I came up with these various characters, I never dreamed that they catch on the way they did, that someday I'd be speaking to William Shatner in a TV studio, and I mean, I just
and
did
having
him.
the largest film that ever
Well, that too.
Box office, but
so I just would write the thing, give it to my publisher, and hope that he would say okay, hope it would sell, so I'd keep my job and I'd keep getting my salary. And I didn't write down, I got to remember, how did I think of it and what was it? And I've got no memory at all.
Right.
But I can give you a guess as to how it happened. I had already done the Fantastic Four and the Hulk. Now, those two books consisted, the Hulk was the strongest living human being, if you call him human. The Fantastic Four had somebody who could burst into flame and fly, an invisible girl, a guy whose body could stretch, and a monster who really was a nice guy with a sense of humor. And I was thinking, all right, my publisher thought those are doing well, give me another one. So I figured, where do I go from there?
yeah, you've already got
different?
every character you could think of.
So I saw a fly on the wall. Now, I don't want you to think my house is full of flies. It just happened there was one fly on the wall.
That year.
And I figured, and the big thing with coming up with the superhero, you have to think of a new power, a superpower.
Right.
And it occurred to me, hey, why not have a superhero who can stick to walls like an insect, you see? Okay, then I needed a name. So I went through a list. Insect Man, that didn't do it. Fly Man, I don't know. Mosquito Man, I got to Spider Man. Well, you'd appreciate this. It sounded dramatic, sounded a little bit sinister and mysterious. But it wasn't that easy, Bill. It wasn't that easy. And I wanted him to be a teenager, because I've hated teenage sidekicks in stories. I always thought if I were a hero, there's no way on earth I'd pal around with some teenager.
Not only a palling, you have to lug him with. You have to defend him all the time.
And be responsible.
And teenage, you don't want to do anything with an underage person.
That's right. At the very least, people would talk, you know.
And murmur and whisper. So
I wanted the hero to be a teenager, and this time he's a hero. He's not a sidekick. The other thing I wanted, because I tried in my own bumbling way to make these things as believable as a superhero fantasy can be. So I thought I'll make him have every problem known to man. He's got to worry about money. He's a little bit of a nerd. Girls don't particularly like him. The guys don't even like him. He has an aunt who's always ill, and he has to worry about...
An aunt being a good idea for a Spider-Man.
Oh, I didn't think... Very good. I wish you had been with me when I was doing those
I'd have been your teenage sidekick.
Oh, gee, that's funny. So at any rate, I presented the idea to my then publisher. He hated it. The first thing he said was, Stan, people hate spiders. You can't make a Spider-Man a hero.
And a reasonable thought, too, that is.
Well, he was a reasonable man. Then he said, you can't have a hero be a teenager. They can only be sidekicks. Finally, he said, and you want him to have problems? Because I was going to have him worry about money, dandruff, acne, allergy attacks, you name it. That was going to be Peter Parker. He said, don't you know what a hero is? I admitted I didn't. So he didn't want to use the thing, and I had to sneak it into a magazine months later. And I featured him on the cover just to get it out of my system, and I forgot about it.
Are we talking Marvel then?
Well, in those days it was called Timely, or no, it was called Atlas Comics. They were always changing their name.
So how did you sneak it onto a cover without him?
We had a magazine that we were about to kill called Amazing Fantasy.
Oh, yes.
And when you're going to publish the last issue of a book, as you know, nobody cares what you put into it. The book is dying.
Well, I don't know that.
Well, you do now. And incidentally, I'm a little upset. I do not see you taking notes.
It's all being recorded.
At any rate, I put it in Amazing Fantasy, and I featured him on the cover, and as I said, nobody would care. It's the last book goodbye. A couple of months later, we got our sales figures. Took that long in those days. And my publisher came in to me, and he said, hey, Stan, you remember that spider character of yours that we both liked so much? Why don't we make a series out of it? And we found out it had gotten the best sales figures of it, just like the movie did so well now. That there's something about
something
Spider-Man.
about the character, something about
I guess.
what you've placed in there. As a writer whose material is being drawn, do you describe the drawing? Do you say, this is my drawing, this is what I want to be illustrated?
In the beginning,
What's the shorthand?
In the beginning, before we evolved the so-called Marvel method, which was me giving the outline to the artist, him drawing it any way he wanted, and me then putting in the dialogue and caption.
Wait a minute,
Before we did that,
yeah.
I used to write, and most of the writers did, a full script. And the script was somewhat like a screenplay. It would say panel 1, and there'd be a description. So-and-so walks down, a close-up of so-and-so walking down the street. Panel 2, a shadowy figure is following him, medium close-up. Panel 3, an overhead shot, the figure does this.
So the reason you stopped giving those directions?
It was because we were having emergencies. I was writing most of the books at that time, most of the stories. And the artists were freelancers. They weren't staff men who were receiving a salary. So if they had nothing to draw, they weren't making money. I couldn't write fast enough to keep 4, 5, 6, 7 artists busy at the time. Let's say I'd be writing a script for Jack Kirby. And then Gene Colan would come in and say, Stan, I finished my job. I need another script. I couldn't stop what I was doing for Jack because he needed it, but I couldn't let Gene be without something to do.
It sounds like a series on television. That's the way episodic television. There's 17 stories in work and everybody's working on it. So
what I did, I would say, look, Gene, I haven't got time to write your script, but I didn't want him to have nothing to do and not make any money. So I said, here's what we'll do. Here's the idea that I have in mind for the next story. I'd like it to have this villain, this is the problem, this is how he solves it, blah, blah, blah. You go ahead and draw it as best you can within 20 pages. Bring it to me, I'll put in the copy. So Gene went off, he was now busy, and I was still doing the script for Jack. Then Gil Kane came in, and he needed a script, and I'd say the same thing.
But wait a minute.
Yeah.
I sound like a comedy routine. But wait a minute, like Jack Benny. But wait a minute.
Well.
How you say to a guy, here's, the villain is going to climb the mountain, and the hero at the top of the mountain rolls a rock down.
That's just how I said it. You did that very well.
So he says, okay, and he draws somebody going up a mountain with a guy behind the mountain ready to roll a rock down. And you, at that point, have no idea what the dialogue is?
No.
So now he hands you these panels, and he says, here it is, just what you asked for.
Write it.
And by this time, you can't remember what the story was because you've done 7 others.
I could hardly remember who the guy is.
Okay, so the guy says, who are you? And what is this? And he says, this is a panel you asked me to draw. Now you have to think of dialogue?
But that's the easiest part. That really is. In fact, it's easier than doing a complete script. Now think of it, Bill. You're doing a script from start. You're looking at a blank sheet of typewriter paper, and you're imagining the characters, what they're doing, how they look, what they're saying. An artist brings you the artwork, and you get a guy who's like this. Well, you know he's angry,
Right.
and you know you're going to put some angry dialogue in.
Right.
It makes it easy.
But you don't know what he's angry about.
No, I'll think of something. Well, yes, I do, because these artists are good, and they would tell the story in pictures
I see.
in a pretty comprehensive way.
And
We only
20
use-
pages, right?
Yeah.
Is that was the
Well, some were
the-
20, some were 22.
But the
It was an
parameters
average.
were in that 20-page area. You said, here's our comic book is 20 pages, like our episode tonight is an hour and a
It's an
half.
hour and a half, right.
And we got to fill that hour and a half. We
Exactly.
got to fill these 20 pages in an exciting story that launches us for next month as well.
Yeah, this better not be just an hour and a half. I have a lot more to say. Anyway, so I would then put it in. Here's the funny thing. I found the stories turned out much better that way than when the writers were just doing regular scripts, because we only used artists that were great visual storytellers. They could conceive of what a panel should look like better than the writer could. For instance, I as a writer might say, I want a long shot of these two characters walking down the street. The artist might figure, it'll be better if I draw a window of a building with their reflection in the window. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So leave it to these guys, because they were geniuses. Remember, I was working with guys like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, who created Spider-Man with me, and he did Doctor Strange with me, Kirby, who did the Fantastic Four and the Hulk, and so many others, and as I said, Colan and Kane and Romita and Buscema, and the people who know comics hearing me say this, they're probably genuflecting right now at the mention of those names.
I think that's what they're doing, or they're going to the bathroom. One or
Well,
the
there's very
other.
little difference.